On my birthday, my rich grandpa smiled and asked, "So, Elizabeth, how do you spend your $3,400,000 trust fund?" I blinked, completely confused. "What trust fund?" I asked. My parents froze. My mom's smile vanished like someone flipped a switch, and my dad looked like he might throw up. Grandpa's cheerful face hardened instantly. He turned to them and asked in a quiet, heavy voice, "Where did it go?" Before diving into the story, comment where you're watching from, and don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss the latest stories. The room went silent. The sound of the grandfather clock in the corner suddenly felt deafening. My mom opened her mouth, but no words came out. My dad's hands were shaking. I didn't understand what was happening, and yet, somewhere deep down, I felt something break inside me. That was the moment everything in my life changed. Growing up, I always knew my grandfather, Richard Hayes, was wealthy. He owned several properties in California, had an old estate with marble floors, and always drove brand-new luxury cars. But he was also humble, the kind of man who wore worn-out leather boots even though he could buy 100 pairs. My parents, on the other hand, were different. Dad was always chasing the next big thing, new startups, crypto schemes, whatever was trending. Mom was more into appearances. She'd spend money on designer handbags and luxury spa days, even when our bills piled up. I was raised thinking we were middle class. Sure, Grandpa helped with school sometimes, but I never got the sense that I was rich. We lived comfortably, but nothing extravagant. I went to a decent public high school, drove a used Honda Civic, and worked part-time at a bookstore in college. I was proud of being independent. So when Grandpa brought up a trust fund, I genuinely thought he was joking. "Dad," I laughed awkwardly that day, trying to lighten the tension. "You're not serious, right?" "I don't have any trust fund." But he wasn't joking. Grandpa's face was pale and tight with anger, not the explosive kind, but the cold, controlled kind that made the air feel heavy. He said quietly, "Elizabeth, when you were born, I set up a trust for you. It was supposed to be untouched until your 21st birthday. That was today." I froze. 21. Today. I looked at my parents. My mom was staring at the floor, and my dad wouldn't meet my eyes. Grandpa continued, "That trust fund had $3.4 million. It was managed under your name, with your parents as guardians until you came of age." My stomach dropped. My knees went weak. "Grandpa," I whispered, "I don't have anything. I swear I never saw any money." He turned to my parents again. "Then where is it?" he asked sharply. No one spoke for what felt like forever. Then Dad cleared his throat and said something that made my whole body go cold. "There were investments," he muttered. "We thought we could grow it. Things didn't go as planned." "Investments?" Grandpa's voice rose slightly, still restrained but shaking. "You spent her inheritance?" Mom jumped in quickly, her voice trembling. "Dad, we didn't spend it, not all of it. We needed help with the mortgage, and the market crashed." But Grandpa wasn't listening anymore. He stood up slowly, his expression unreadable, and said in a tone that chilled the room, "Elizabeth, come with me." He walked me to his study, a dark, oak-paneled room filled with old books and family photos. He pulled out a folder from his desk drawer and handed it to me. Inside were documents, bank statements, transfer receipts, and a trust agreement signed by him, my parents, and an attorney. And right there, in black and white, was my name, Elizabeth Hayes. Beneficiary. Trust value, $3,400,000. My breath caught. The documents showed the money had been moved, gradually, over the years, into my parents' joint accounts. I remember my voice trembling as I whispered, They took it?" Grandpa nodded slowly. "They stole from their own daughter." I felt like my world shattered. Every birthday, every holiday, every time they told me we couldn't afford something, all of it flashed before me. The cheap clothes, the stress about bills, the second-hand textbooks. It was all a lie. When I walked back into the living room, my parents were waiting, pale and quiet. Grandpa didn't sit. He just looked at them and said, "You have 1 week to make this right." They tried to speak, to explain, but he raised his hand. "No, 1 week." And then he turned to me, and for the first time in my life, I saw disappointment in his eyes. That night, I sat in my car outside my apartment and cried. Not just because of the money, but because my own parents had betrayed me in a way I could never have imagined. And that's when I decided I wasn't going to let them get away with it. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw their faces, my mom's trembling hands, my dad's fake calm. I wanted to believe there was some misunderstanding, but the documents in Grandpa's folder said it all. Every transaction, every transfer, every investment was there, and every single one had my parents' signatures on it. The next morning, Grandpa called me. His voice was calm, but I could tell he hadn't slept either. "Elizabeth," he said, "I'm meeting my attorney today. I want you to come." When I arrived at his house, he was already in his study with a man in a gray suit, Mr. Collins, a lawyer who'd been with the family for decades. He handed me a cup of coffee, looked me straight in the eye, and said, "We're going to fix this." Mr. Collins explained that technically, my parents were trustees of my fund until I turned 21. That meant they had a legal obligation to protect it, not use it. If they'd touched a cent for personal gain, it was embezzlement, plain and simple. But recovering that money wouldn't be easy. "Most of it's probably gone," he said gently. "We'll need to trace the accounts, the investments, and any property purchased with it. It'll take time." Grandpa nodded firmly. "Do whatever it takes. I'll cover your fees." Then he looked at me. "Elizabeth, you're the one they stole from. You have to decide what happens next." I didn't answer right away. Part of me wanted to scream, to drag them into court that very moment. But another part of me, the one that still remembered Christmas mornings and family dinners, just felt hollow. I whispered, "I just want to know why." For the next few days, I kept my distance from my parents. Mom sent a few texts, all of them the same, "We can explain." I didn't reply. Instead, I threw myself into helping Mr. Collins trace the money. We discovered that most of it had been invested into my dad's business ventures, all of which failed. Some went into paying off credit card debt, some into a luxury SUV, and one horrifyingly large chunk went toward home renovations on the house they'd sold last year for a huge profit. "Looks like they cashed in," Mr. Collins said grimly. It turned out my parents had been living off my inheritance for years, pretending to struggle, making me feel guilty for asking for college help, while secretly using my money to live comfortably. Every discovery felt like a new betrayal. 3 days later, Grandpa called a family meeting. I didn't want to go, but he insisted. When I arrived, my parents were already there, pale, defensive, and clearly scared. Grandpa sat at the head of the table, a folder of documents in front of him. He started calmly. "I've reviewed the statements. There's no misunderstanding. You stole from your daughter." Dad spoke first. "It wasn't like that, Dad. We thought we were investing for her future." "Stop," Grandpa interrupted sharply. "You invested in yourself. You spent it on cars, trips, and business failures. That wasn't your money." Mom's voice broke. "We thought we could fix it before she found out." "Fix it?" Grandpa laughed bitterly. "You had 21 years. I just sat there, silent. Watching them scramble, make excuses, it was like watching strangers. I didn't even recognize my own parents anymore." Then Grandpa did something I didn't expect. He turned to me and said, "Elizabeth, what do you want to do?" All eyes turned to me. My heart pounded in my chest. I looked at my parents, people who had taught me to be honest, to work hard, to trust family, and I saw nothing but guilt and fear in their faces. I said quietly, "I want to make things right." Grandpa nodded slowly. "Good. Then we'll do this your way." After that, things moved fast. Grandpa's lawyers filed a civil claim in my name, freezing what little remained in my parents' accounts. I moved out of my apartment and into Grandpa's guest house. It was quiet, peaceful, and for the first time in weeks, I felt safe. But something inside me had changed. This wasn't just about money anymore. It was about the years they'd lied to me, the guilt trips, the manipulation, the way they made me feel like I was ungrateful for asking for help. Grandpa told me once, revenge isn't about hurting people. It's about teaching them what their choices cost. And that stuck with me. So I decided my revenge wouldn't be loud or messy. It would be slow, deliberate, and impossible for them to escape. A week later, I called my mom. My voice was calm when I said, "I'm not dropping the case. But I'm giving you one chance to be honest. Tell me everything." There was silence. Then, through tears, she whispered, "Your father said it was temporary. He promised we'd pay it back. But then we started losing everything, and I was too scared to stop him." I didn't say a word. I just listened to her cry, the same way she used to ignore me when I cried as a kid. When she finished, I said softly, "I'll see you in court." And I hung up. That night, I looked out the window of Grandpa's estate, the lights of the city glowing in the distance. They'd stolen my money, my trust, and my peace. But I had something they didn't: time, evidence, and the will to fight. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't scared of them anymore. The day the lawsuit was officially filed, my phone exploded with messages. Mom called over and over. Dad sent long, angry texts that started with, "How could you do this to your own parents?" and ended with, "You'll regret it." I didn't reply to a single one. For the first time in my life, I was done being the quiet, forgiving daughter. Grandpa had warned me that it wouldn't be easy. "They'll try to guilt you," he said. "They'll twist it until you feel like the villain. Don't let them." He was right. Within days, word spread through our extended family. My aunt called, saying Mom was heartbroken and that maybe I should find a way to move on. But I didn't back down. I was calm, polite, and determined. The first court hearing was brutal. My parents showed up looking pitiful, like two people crushed by life's circumstances. Mom dabbed fake tears while Dad gave long-winded speeches about how everything had been for my future. Their lawyer argued that they never stole the money, they simply mismanaged it. But Mr. Collins came prepared. He presented the trust agreement, transaction receipts, and records of vacations, cars, and personal loans, all funded by my account. When the judge asked me to speak, I stood up, heart racing. "Your Honor," I said, "for years I believed we were barely getting by. I worked part-time in college. I skipped trips, holidays, and opportunities because my parents told me we couldn't afford them. Now I know that while I struggled, they were using my inheritance to live comfortably." The courtroom was silent. Even the judge's expression softened. In that moment, I wasn't just fighting for money. I was fighting for every version of myself they had deceived. After the hearing, Grandpa and I went for coffee. He looked proud, but also sad. "It hurts, doesn't it?" he asked quietly. I nodded. "It's like losing your parents while they're still alive." He took a slow sip. "You didn't lose them, sweetheart. They lost you." Those words stuck with me. Weeks turned into months as the case dragged on. During that time, something shifted in me. I stopped seeing myself as a victim and started thinking strategically. Grandpa once owned multiple businesses. He knew how to negotiate, how to turn loss into leverage. He began teaching me about contracts, finance, and the importance of control. "If they took advantage of your trust once," he said, "don't give anyone the chance to do it again. Learn everything. No more than they expect you to." So I did. I spent my days at the law firm, learning how the legal system worked. I attended every meeting, every deposition. And every time my parents' lawyer tried to twist the story, I had receipts. Literally. One discovery meeting revealed that my parents had secretly used my trust as collateral for a loan on a luxury property in Arizona, a property they'd sold under a shell company. The profit? Nearly $500,000. When the evidence was shown to the court, my dad's face went gray. Afterward, Grandpa looked at me and said, "You just buried them, Liz." It wasn't all easy victories. At night, I still cried sometimes, not because I missed them, but because I couldn't understand how they'd chosen greed over love. I remembered being 16 and asking for $200 to go on a school trip. They said no, that things were tight. I'd gone home crying that day. Now I knew they were probably booking a vacation with my money that same week. The more I learned, the less pity I felt. One afternoon, I got an unexpected visit. My mom showed up at Grandpa's gate, pale and shaky. "Please, Elizabeth," she said as I opened the door, "your father's losing his mind over this. We'll lose everything. We'll be ruined." I stared at her. "You already ruined something, me." She burst into tears. "We didn't mean to hurt you. We thought we were doing what was best." I folded my arms. "What's best for who?" Her silence said it all. Then she whispered, "If you drop the case, we can make it up to you. We'll start over." I almost laughed. "You had 21 years to make it right. Now you can explain yourself to the court." She left sobbing. And though my heart ached, I didn't feel guilt, just closure. A month later, the case reached a critical point. Mr. Collins called me into his office, a faint smile on his face. "They're offering a settlement," he said. "Full restitution of $3.4 million plus additional damages. They can't risk a criminal charge." I sat in silence. It was what I wanted, justice. But it still didn't feel like victory. "Do we take it?" I asked. He looked at Grandpa, who nodded. "Yes," Grandpa said softly. "But make it on your terms." So we did. The settlement required my parents to liquidate assets, sell their home, and sign a public acknowledgement of what they'd done. It wasn't about humiliating them, it was about accountability. When they signed the papers, Dad's hands trembled. Mom avoided my eyes. I didn't smile. I just said, "Now you'll know what it feels like to lose everything you took for granted." Afterward, Grandpa hugged me. "I'm proud of you," he whispered. "Not for the lawsuit, for standing up for yourself." I smiled faintly. "It doesn't feel like revenge," I said. He chuckled. "That's because real revenge isn't loud. It's silent, patient, and final." And as we left the courthouse, I realized he was right. The money didn't matter anymore. What mattered was that I finally had control, not just of my finances, but of my life. After the settlement, life felt oddly quiet. My parents moved into a modest rental and kept to themselves. Paperwork said justice was done, but I still felt hollow. Grandpa and I agreed there was one more step, not to punish, but to make them truly understand. We arranged a restorative meeting at the Hayes estate. My parents arrived frail and nervous. A small circle of family and a neighbor gathered, no press, no spectacle. Grandpa opened his leather journal and read a passage about promises and responsibility, explaining why he had set up the trust for me. His voice was steady. "This fund was meant to protect a child's future," he said. "You betrayed that trust." I stood and read a statement I had written. I spoke plainly, how I'd been denied school trips and small freedoms because my parents said we couldn't afford them, while they lived comfortably on my money. I explained how the betrayal had hollowed out my sense of safety. I wasn't there for revenge in the dramatic sense. I wanted accountability that mattered. I proposed terms: public acknowledgement of wrongdoing, 6 months volunteering at a youth center, family therapy, and a transparency clause requiring independent oversight on any future financial decisions involving me. My father protested. "This humiliates us," he said. "No," I answered, "this makes you responsible." Grandpa added a final condition that surprised everyone. He produced a small envelope with seed money, a modest amount, and explained it was a test. If they met the terms honestly, the money would help them rebuild. If they failed, the funds would go to a scholarship for vulnerable kids. They signed. The act of signing in front of relatives, people who had quietly supported me, landed harder than any courtroom sentence. It forced them to face not just legal consequences, but moral ones. For months, they complied. They showed up at the youth center and cleaned, organized after-school programs, and taught basic skills. They attended therapy and wrote an honest public apology. It was messy and slow. It didn't erase what they'd done, but it exposed them to the consequences. One day I dropped by unexpectedly. I found my father sitting on the floor with a little boy, fixing a toy. He had grease on his hands and concentration on his face, a humility I had never seen. He glanced up and said simply, "It's harder to give than to take." That moment felt like the true climax. There were no dramatic confessions or tearful forgiveness scenes. Instead, I watched tangible, quiet change, action replacing excuses. My parents were not perfect now, they were accountable in small, meaningful ways. Grandpa watched all this with a calm satisfaction. One night he told me, "Real revenge is final. It makes room for something better." He'd never wanted to ruin them. He wanted me to reclaim my life and force them to choose. They chose the hard road. When their obligations ended, they had little left materially, but they had begun the slow work of repair. The envelope's money had been used responsibly. The scholarship clause redirected funds when necessary. My parents' public letter read candidly about their wrongdoing. The community reaction varied, but that wasn't the point. The point was that their denial had been replaced by concrete steps toward restitution. Standing in the parlor after the last signature, I felt a shift, a lightness that had nothing to do with money. The settlement had been a cold victory. This was different. It was the day they were finally forced to look at what they'd cost me and to act. That was the final, quiet sting of the climax. Revenge, in the end, wasn't spectacle. It was consequence and learning. Grandpa's twist, offering them a chance to rebuild under strict terms, flipped the usual script. Instead of breaking someone, it made them accountable and visible. It was a lesson in humility more effective than any public shaming I could have engineered. When I left that night, the house felt different. The weight of betrayal was still there, but it had been confronted. I had the last word not through destruction, but by choosing a form of justice that demanded responsibility. That choice felt, surprisingly, like freedom. In the months after, I rebuilt my life with Grandpa's guidance. I enrolled in night classes to study finance and made a plan to manage what was left of the restored funds responsibly. I started a small scholarship in my grandfather's name to help students who lacked support, an act that turned bitterness into something useful. Each time I felt anger rise, I remembered Grandpa's words, "Make your life your statement." That became my revenge, a life rebuilt. A year later, everything was different. The chaos had faded, the lawyers were gone, and my parents had finished every condition Grandpa laid out. They still lived modestly in a small townhouse on the edge of town, a far cry from the lavish home they once owned. Sometimes I'd pass by their street on my way to the community center. The first few times, I couldn't bring myself to stop. The anger was still there, not burning hot anymore, but a quiet ember I carried around like a scar. But one sunny afternoon, I parked my car and walked to their door. Mom opened it. Her hair was streaked with gray now, her face thinner. She froze when she saw me. For a second, I thought she might close the door, but instead, she whispered, "Liz." "Hi, Mom," I said softly. She stepped aside without a word, and I walked in. The house was small but neat. A few old family photos hung on the walls, pictures from when I was little, before all the lies. Dad came out of the kitchen. He looked older too, tired but different. There was no arrogance left in him, no anger. Just a kind of quiet remorse. I sat at the dining table, the same way I had 100 times growing up. But now it felt like a stranger's house. Dad spoke first. "We don't expect you to forgive us," he said. "But we want you to know we're proud of who you've become." I didn't say anything for a moment. Then I nodded. "I know." Mom's eyes filled with tears. "We were so scared to see you again. We thought you hated us." I did, I admitted. For a long time. But hate doesn't last forever. It just runs out of fuel. They both looked down. The silence between us wasn't comfortable, but it wasn't hostile anymore either. It was the sound of people standing at the end of something. After that day, I didn't suddenly forgive them. But I also didn't need to keep punishing them. They were already living the consequence every day, rebuilding from nothing, facing the community they once tried to impress. And me? I was finally living freely. Grandpa and I spent a lot of time together that year. He taught me about managing investments, philanthropy, and how to never let money control your peace. He said wealth could protect you or destroy you. It depended on how you carried it. On my 22nd birthday, he surprised me with a new document. It was a deed not for a trust fund, but for a small bookstore in town that had gone up for sale. "I know how much you love stories," he said with a smile. "It's time you write your own." I laughed through tears. "You're really giving me a bookstore?" He nodded. "You already know how to turn pain into lessons. Now use that to build something." Running that little bookstore changed everything. I named it Second Chapter Books. It became a cozy spot for locals, coffee, quiet reading corners, and shelves filled with stories about resilience and redemption. Sometimes people came in just to talk, teenagers going through family issues, young adults trying to find their footing. I never told them my story, but I listened. And in those conversations, I found something deeper than revenge, purpose. One evening, Grandpa came by the store just before closing. He walked around, looking at the shelves, the soft lighting, the handwritten quotes pinned to the walls. "You've done good, kid," he said. "You turned all that ugliness into something worth remembering." I smiled. "You always said revenge should teach people what their choices cost." "I guess it taught me too." He nodded thoughtfully. "It did. But the best revenge is living so well they can't touch your peace again." Months later, I got a letter in the mail. It was from my parents. There was no apology this time, no excuses, just a simple note. "We're proud of you, Liz. Thank you for teaching us what it means to be honest again. Love, Mom and Dad." For the first time, I believed them. I didn't write back, but I kept the letter in my desk drawer. Not as a token of forgiveness, but as a reminder that revenge doesn't always have to end in ruin. Sometimes it ends in growth, and that's the most powerful kind there is. Years passed. Grandpa eventually passed away peacefully in his sleep, leaving behind a legacy far greater than money. He left behind wisdom. He taught me that integrity is wealth, and revenge without compassion just turns you into what you're fighting. At his funeral, I stood up to speak. I looked out at the small crowd and said, "He once told me, real revenge is when you build a life so good that no one's betrayal can undo it." That's the life I'm living thanks to him. And that was true. Today, I still run second chapter books. The store does well, but more importantly, it feels like home, something I built with honesty, with peace, and with purpose. Sometimes, when a customer browses the shelves and I see a young girl clutching a book like it's her lifeline, I think about that birthday, the one that changed everything. It started with a lie. It ended with freedom. And that, I've learned, is the best kind of revenge. If you enjoyed this story of unexpected revenge and justice, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe to Revenge Files for more true stories that prove karma always finds its way. See you in the next one.